for being here. And true to the usual format of our podcast, I usually say welcome. So welcome. This is going to be like a live version of the podcast, but with a lot more interaction and experiential practice kind of intermixed. And we actually did do this particular topic for our podcast back in episode 4, where mindfulness is magic, where it was about the magic and the power of coaching with, actually mindful coaching with formal mindfulness practice. So our intention for today's session, is to share what me and Jessie see as basically the secret sauce to expedite this concept of mindful metamorphosis. How you see how basically having a more formal mindfulness practice can change your life. And then when you combine the two, it's like someone just added steroids in terms of creating a more easeful life and to create intentional progress in a way that isn't too aggressive. It's in a way that's authentic, and it's in a way that is with self-compassion.
And in a way that's not that throttle of transformation, and that quote that I shared, which I'll share again. So it's this idea of coming from this place of just ease and presence. So in the podcast, we always talk about what we hope you'll discover. And so we hope today to share this concept that it's important to have a foundation in mindfulness for both your health and wellness. And that mindful coaching is different than other coaching. And I'll share why I think it's different and what makes it different and how it can help you more specifically. And then the slowness and space of mindfulness is what I consider to be that secret sauce. And so it's the secret to, interestingly, expediting that profound change, but it's the slowness that actually leads to the change and the progress. And so it's funny that we chose this word expediting, because it's slowness that leads to the fastness. And that I see mindfulness and mindful coaching as a performance tool and a happiness tool, and essentially a form of preventive care for doctors. And I'm going to borrow one of our former participants who said that she had a whole box of tools for her toolbox. But understanding that when you have these tools and you practice these tools and you actually practice them, you don't just consume them by listening to 10% Happier or just listening to Headspace here or there or joining an MHC session, but that you actually use them in a regular practice, that they change you. And then those tools become a way of life. And that's really what happens when you do this work. And so the takeaway is really that this work changes you inherently. And that's the essence of the word metamorphosis, right? You dissolve and change, and you become no longer the caterpillar, but the butterfly. And so you're inherently, through the work, become a different person. So the other concept that I really want to be a piece of what you learn from this is that you actually have to do the work. And many of us, myself included, spent a long time listening to podcasts and popping into things here or there. And that does not transform you from the caterpillar to the butterfly. It's not the metamorphosis. And there is, in the Life Coach School, a podcast called Hope is a Problem. And someone else said, hope is not a marketing strategy today, which reminded me of this podcast. And it's when you choose hope and you just wish it will get better, that's not how it actually gets better. You have to go through the muck and the sticky wings of the metamorphosis and the gooey cocoon to get out to the other side. And that is the practice of both mindfulness and mindful coaching. And I will tell you that I didn't do formal mindfulness until I took Ni-Cheng's class last summer. And there really is a difference between understanding it and knowing what the practice is. And so there is this difference between partaking just a little bit and really delving in and diving in and experiencing it. So our plan for tonight is to give you a taste of the tools that pop up in all these different areas, to have fun with them and to share our experience and to share. We have someone here who did the whole program, is going to share her experience, just so you have an idea of what all the things are like. So you can see like, well, what resonates, what doesn't, what part of it might you have already done, what's possible, and to share that for fun. And so to start, we always like to start with mindfulness to get us into the right space. And so, as I always recommend, find a comfortable seat, ground your sit bones into the chair, the floor, the bed, whatever you happen to be sitting on. And if you are driving, pay attention and don't partake. Be safe. And take a moment to just settle into wherever you're sitting. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes and lengthen your inhale and lengthen your exhale. Try to match the length of the inhale with the exhale, even them out. Bring your left hand to your heart and your right hand atop. Press in gently. Just release a little bit of oxytocin, the feel-good hormone. Take a moment to connect with your heart underneath. Your heart that's continually there by your side, doing the work and helping you move through life. And focus on the breath once again. Bring it in deeply through your nose and out through your mouth. And I wanted to share this passage once again, because to me, it speaks to why I think this work is so important and how it really transformed my own life. At some point on the journey, you may reach a point where you want to ease the throttle of transformation, not where you stop growing, but where you stop utilizing your will to affect personal change. You're still growthful, but it's different. It's gentler, and it's more about accepting what is than changing it. You reach a place where you are more embracing of who you are and of how far you have come, and you feel ready to work with what you've got. It's important to notice this moment if it arrives, because there is a real peace in that tender self-acceptance. And ironically, it may ignite the most profound change of all. So this is what I lived myself and what I see. And this quote was actually shared by one of my clients with me. It's written by a man named Jeff Brown. So once again, focus back on your inhale, lengthen the inhale, and a long, smooth exhale. And press in towards your heart center gently once again. Connect with yourself within. Find that spot of tender self-acceptance and connect with it. Take a moment to pause and be present. And notice who you are and where you are in this moment. And slowly lower your hands to your thighs and open your eyes and let the light back in.
So we're going to transition now to a practice that Professor Rhonda McGee, an internationally renowned mindfulness teacher and law professor, who wrote the book that I have right here, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. And we had her on for an earlier MHC book club. And she calls it the ICU practice. There's been yet again another killing of a Black male. And besides all of the heightened racial tensions that have been going on over this last year, I wanted to take some time right now to acknowledge that there is a lot of suffering right now in the world, not just because of COVID, but the way that COVID has unmasked and has revealed a lot of the underbelly of racism, of health disparities in the United States and really in the world right now. So as part of that, I wanted to honor everyone's presence here. And so if it's available to you, I'm going to welcome you to come off of hiding your video. So you're going to come on video if you're able to, and we'll take some time to simply look at every single person that's here. Perhaps meeting them with their eyes, and eye contact is a bit challenging in this way, but if you want to go to gallery view so that we can see all of your beautiful faces. So being intentional about going through row by row, column by column, and really looking at the person that's here, reminding yourself of potentially all of the different ancestors and the acknowledgement of their story, even if you don't know it, even if you don't know this person, reminding you that there is this common shared humanity and a commonality in the suffering that is going on right now, which is also at the same time different for everyone. So just taking some time that's protected to honor everyone's presence here right now. So I'm going to invite you to just kind of go through box by box, and you might want to welcome a smile or not, however you want to keep your face while people are also going through this exercise with you at the same time. And as you're ready, bringing a sense of gratitude for everyone for being here, for showing up just as they are, and also gratitude for yourself for being here just as you are. Allowing and accepting everyone for who they are in this moment, allowing and accepting yourself for who you are and how you're showing up in this moment.
Thank you for that. So I wanted to share just for a moment that though I know I do a lot of mindfulness, and I did mindfulness training as part of my yoga teacher training. And I have been trained to do the beginning and end of yoga classes, and yogic philosophy is very much about mindful living and a mindful approach to your life. And even with that, formal mindfulness training is different. And I didn't even understand what that is and what it meant and how it could change you until I took mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I think it's really important that we, as physicians, whether we choose to practice it and take the course or not, understand what it is and how it can help. And so for me, it changed the way that I think about mindfulness, and it did give me tools in my toolbox that then allowed me to find a way to incorporate it into my life and the way that I approach things in a way where I was different before. than before I took the class. And so, and I will, with full disclosure, because I know that Ni-Cheng is going to tell you all the details. I wasn't able to go to every class, and I wasn't a perfect A+ student in mindfulness-based stress reduction, and I still got tremendous benefit. And I think April will probably share her story too, which doesn't mean you shouldn't be, but it's okay to be perfectly imperfect or imperfectly perfect, and you'll still get benefit from the experience. And so I'm hoping, Ni-Cheng, you can explain more about what is formal mindfulness-based stress reduction and why we should do it, and what's the science behind it, so people know.
Yeah, so reminding everyone that mindfulness is nothing more than paying attention on purpose to the present moment. And all of us innately as humans have the capability to do that. But yet in the 21st century, technology, the badge of busyness, the badge of exhaustion, being martyrs in working literally sometimes to the bone, has kind of superseded our ability in a lot of respects to be mindful. When mindfulness is such a key component to what Jessie had mentioned in terms of slowing down. So it's this intentional noticing that you can cultivate. So similar to exercise for your physical body, mindfulness practice is like exercise for the brain. And you can actually literally change the way the brain works, and it can be for the better. So with formal mindfulness practice, you can increase the gray matter densities in sites of compassion and empathy, and then decrease gray matter density in sites of the fight or flight response, like the amygdala. So what we're trying to do is to basically break up the default mode network that our brains are hardwired for, including what many of us are very, very good at is negative attention bias, where we focus on and we ruminate about the negatives of a particular situation. We hang on to stressful events, discomfort, criticisms a lot more than we do the positive events. And interestingly, there's a lot more positive events that occur during the day, and yet we over-identify with the negative events, and then that becomes over-consuming, and then it creates suffering. So in terms of what mindfulness-based stress reduction is, it's a very formulated class that was developed by John Kabat-Zinn back in 1979 for chronic pain. And since then, there have been over 9,000 articles published in the medical literature about its use in stress and anxiety and a whole host of different chronic diseases. Notable for me, because I'm a cancer survivor, I'm also a pulmonologist, has been benefits in asthma, COPD, addiction, also as a cancer survivor in cancer survivorship too, along with caregivers. So formal mindfulness practice can come from a class like mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is, I think, the foundational practice of how one can learn the practice of mindfulness in the modern day and age without going into a religious context. Because yes, it's very true that mindfulness-based stress reduction has roots in 4,000-year-old practices from Zen Buddhism, for instance. But if you think about it, every single major religion has a major contemplative practice as well. So mindfulness is not a religion. It can be a way of life. It usually starts off as a tool that you learn, which then becomes part of one's lifestyle, should you choose it to be, and should you practice it enough so that it actually seeps into all the nooks and crannies of your life in ways that you don't necessarily anticipate unless you're practicing it pretty much every day and exercising that mindfulness muscle. So hopefully that answers your question, Jessie, about that. And then in terms of like formal mindfulness practice, so formal mindfulness practice as opposed to informal practice. So informal practice is easy in that it's the matching of your brain and your physical body kind of in the same place at the same time. With formal practice, you are protecting time for you to do that. And the classical formal practice is like a sitting meditation. When we bring up the word meditation, you might have thoughts of people sitting in like full lotus posture with fancy hand positions that are mudras, which can be part of someone's mindfulness practice or someone's religious contemplative practice, but it doesn't have to be. So you can incorporate different aspects of movement into a formal practice, like a lot of the mindful yoga classes that Jessie leads would be construed as formal mindfulness practice. You can also do walking meditations. So walking mindfully is very different than walking in general. And then the body scan practice, which is one of the foundational practices within mindfulness-based stress reduction, reteaches us how to notice what we feel in our bodies, especially when we are stressed or when there's discomfort. But initially, the body scan practice is really about becoming more in tune with our bodies, because especially in healthcare, we are super in our brains at a cognitive level most of the day, as opposed to checking in with our bodies. Like we don't have a habit created to check in with our bodies. And mindfulness allows you to do that. And oftentimes the body is a barometer for your life. Anything else, Jessie, that you wanted to ask me about?
I think just what you said about habits. And so what the formal practice and doing like something intensive like this, it just helps you form a habit. And I think many of us know about habit forming and things that help you form habits. And so it's really just a strategy to bring that habit into your life. And I'm curious, April, do you have thoughts about your experience with it? And then I really am hoping you're going to share with us that body scan for your shoulders and your neck, because I was thinking that was coming soon and I'm all ready. Just saying.
Yeah, so hi, I'm April. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist, and I met Ni-Cheng at a medical conference about 2 years ago. And I went to one of the mindfulness sessions. And at that time I had done, so maybe a little yoga, maybe once in a while I'd meditated, but I had never done a formal practice. But when COVID hit, I was on Ni-Cheng's email and she had sent information about doing the course, the mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as the coaching. And because of COVID, I'm a pulmonologist. I was seeing a lot of obviously sick patients, not as many as Ni-Cheng. I had a lot of anxiety and stress, and I thought that it might be a helpful thing to help me deal with the situation. And I think it's really transformed my life for a good way. In terms of the mindfulness-based stress reduction class, it is a time commitment, but I think it was one of the best things I've ever done. It's 1 to 2 hours in the weekend, and then every day you're committing to doing different mindfulness modalities. But that helped me because as a busy mom, to have to do that practice. And like Jessie said, I didn't do it every day. It really forced me to retrain my brain. And then part of the program is the coaching with Jessie. And that was just amazing, just hearing them talk about it. And I think I had never been coached. I'd never done coaching. And I guess you guys can talk more, but essentially it changes the way that your mind thinks about a problem. So for instance, I had a lot of anxiety about dealing with COVID patients, dealing with my colleagues, PPE, and Jessie would just reformulate the way that I could think about it and reframe everything. And once I worked with her a few times, I was like, wow, this is really magic. It's changing my whole way that I think about my life and the problems. And so I think doing the two together, I think really complemented each other. Did you specific question? Yeah.
Thank you, April.
And in terms of my practice of medicine, I think it made me much more, I listened to my patients more. I was much less anxious. I incorporate kind of informal meditation in my practice. When I put my PPE on, I do some deep breathing, and I try to make breaks during the day. Just for an example, when I get stressed about situations, I reframe the situation because of the coaching. So I incorporate it into my day all the time. And I think with my family, I'm much, much more relaxed and at ease. So it's an ongoing process. I'm still doing, coaching as well.
Thank you so much, April. And I know Jessie and I so enjoy having you in our communities. So we are so grateful for your ongoing support. So at this point, I'm going to invite all of you now to participate in a brief body scan practice. And body scan practice is classically done laying down. So I invite you to do that, or you can just sit wherever you're at, or you can stand up. So body scan technically can be done in any particular position, but I'm going to invite you to choose whatever position you would like to be in for this practice. We're probably going to do it for about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little less. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. Or if you don't feel safe doing that, you can lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. Asking you to choose to notice the points of contact between you and your surrounding environment, like the chair or the couch or bed that you're sitting on, the support of the ground beneath you. Giving yourself permission to fully arrive into this moment as we're about to start this brief body scan practice. And as you're ready, I'm going to invite you to notice your breath at your nostrils. Not trying to change it in any way, simply acknowledging the sensations of air as you inhale and as you exhale. And noticing the pause in between. And as you're ready, I invite you to broaden your awareness now down to your shoulders. So this is a part of our body that holds a lot of stress for many of us. And noticing what sensations are there for you now. Perhaps there's tension or discomfort, or no sensation at all. Simply noticing the sensations of the shoulders right now. And if you'd like, I invite you to perhaps metaphorically bring your breath to the shoulders. breathing into the shoulders for a welcoming of some release, a softening. Seeing what comes up for you as you bring the breath to the shoulders. If there's any sensations that are different in doing that. And as you're ready, I invite you to shift your attention to the neck. So this vital part of our body that connects our head to the rest of our bodies. Checking in with the sensations of the neck right now. And again, having the option to invite the breath to areas of the neck. And in fact, realizing that the breath is in the neck as well with every inhale and exhale. And as you're ready, shifting attention back to the breath at the nostrils. Taking a moment to notice how you feel now compared to just a few minutes ago. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And that poem is a translation by Coleman Barks from Rumi's selected poems. And with that, I invite you to blink open your eyes when you're ready and refocus back on the larger group. And feel free to pop in the chat box, or you can unmute yourselves and popcorn out any sensations that you might have now or what you're noticing now after that brief body scan practice. And oftentimes in the formal mindfulness-based stress reduction course, we will pair formal practices with poetry. And so there is some art to the practice of formal mindfulness, especially when it's guided. Thank you, Dr. Mahoney, for saying that you have so much more space in your chest and less tension in your shoulders. As a pulmonologist, I'm really grateful for you sharing that. More relaxed and settled. Great.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth, if you could explain a little bit more, like, how do you know that you're more relaxed and settled? What does that feel like in your body to be more relaxed and settled? Great, Miriam, way to tap into the actual felt sensation of that your head just feels less foggy.
I would agree with that. My head is a little less foggy. I'm a little bit more calm. I feel a little bit more open, and my chest feels more relaxed for sure.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, this idea of treating each feeling as a visitor. So can we treat every circumstance in our life, regardless of if they're positive or negative or neutral, as a visitor? So thanks for practicing with me.
And that thought is a lovely transition into coaching, because it's this idea that the thoughts and feelings are visitors, and we get to make of them what we choose. I think so often we don't realize that it's a choice, and we don't take on the agency that we can have. And so what I really wanted to talk about here was noticing how you feel after that. And noticing the change in how you feel. And what I love about combining mindfulness and coaching, and why I feel like they're different, is that when you show up with this calm spaciousness, less foggy is the perfect analogy here, you have clarity, and it's much easier to move forward and to see what's going on in your head without judgment and make decisions from there. So what we've found is when people have a mindfulness practice, and I love working with Ni-Cheng, because when people come to me after doing this mindfulness work, our work together is so much more productive and efficient. And I guess the type A doctor in me likes that, but it's also feels so good to everyone. It flows and there's ease. And even if someone hasn't done mindfulness-based stress reduction, I always advocate that they do some mindfulness, and that I approach coaching not from this goal focus, but shifting the way you approach the world. And someone brought up to me the other day about my yoga classes, so I'm going to explain that here too, is that the way that I teach yoga, so it's Hatha yoga is the style of holding the positions and noticing what you feel. But why I call it mindful yoga is incorporating like the meditation into the movement, and incorporating the mindfulness and the thoughts and the purpose and intention, so that, and if you notice in yoga, when I bring up thoughts and ways of thinking about things and directing, it's kind of directed mindfulness, it flows because you're in this relaxed state where your parasympathetic nervous system is up-leveled and your fight or flight is decreased. That's what mindfulness does for you. And so that's why it's kind of the secret sauce, or sort of expediting your transition, or allowing, in my mind, much more profound change than either of them alone. It's the synergy between the two that feels like that magic that April mentioned, or like a light bulb turning on. You're primed or lubed or greased up. Your brain and your neurons and your synapses are just much more receptive and less resistant and less judgmental. So I see it as these concepts that are mindfulness concepts of kindness, acceptance, compassion, and non-judgment. And this, the quote that I read about tender self-acceptance, when you can approach coaching from that space, asking yourself questions like what love would do, or this one came up this week, which is going to be a new thing for me. What would peace do in a relationship? So if you want peace, peaceful relationships, what would peace do? And so approaching it from that mindful, curious space. So question asking is curiosity, and being intentional about the feelings that you want, knowing that they're visitors, but you can choose which visitors come into your house or not. You can welcome them to stay and embrace them, or you can notice that they're there and not attach to them. So you get to choose. And so, as Ni-Cheng mentioned, not only does mindfulness seep into every nook and cranny, but when you bring mindfulness and coaching together, you can bring that to every nook and cranny. So some people come to me because of work challenges, and charting challenges is a very common one. And some people come, and actually, I think April won't mind that I share this, but when I first met April, it was during the election, and she had a lot of anxiety around last year's election, which I know many people did. And so she learned a lot of these tools through processing that and how to lessen her anxiety over the election and the potential outcome. And in coaching, we really focus on what's in your control and what's not in your control. And then the anxiety comes from what you're trying to control that's not in your control. And so mindfulness allows you to step back and see really clearly what's in those buckets and focus on where you have agency rather than spinning in all the stories and thoughts in your head that are not in your control. So I really see it as about seeing clearly. And so I love that this concept of like the fog has lifted, or I often talk about the snow globe quieting. And so that then you can be directed in what you want to do in that space. And we often talk about the space between stimulus and response. Mindfulness, whether it's MBSR or other practices of mindfulness, lengthen that pause. And it's in that pause that the coaching happens. But when someone comes to that pause and has the ability to lengthen it and comes to it calm, peaceful, spacious, with more space in their chest. Chest is where I have all my tension. So when I practice mindfulness, it's always that space in my chest that I immediately notice. And we all carry it in different places. For some people, it's their head. Some people, it's their throat. Some people, it's like always a pit in their stomach. And we're all different. But mindfulness teaches you to see where you are and notice it. And notice, excuse me, the change that you want to make. So I thought I'd share one other story just about how mindfulness and coaching kind of interplay. And you don't have to be a yoga person and you don't have to be a mindfulness person necessarily to see this, but I worked with someone who was primary care doctor, seeing patient every 15 minutes, lots of overwhelm, lots of stress. And when we talked about how she would like to experience her practice, she loved medicine, she loved her patients, but it just felt like too much all the time. So she came to approaching her practice like a yoga class, and that she would be present for all the transitions and allow whatever to happen. So some of the positions are hard and they're challenging, but they end. And when you're present for it and you enjoy maybe the tension in the back of your leg, or you enjoy the breath and you take pauses where you can, and you move through and you're just present with all of it exactly as it is, you're not resisting it, then it feels so much better. And what she found was the same day with the same number of patients, if she went in saying, I'm going to approach it, she actually would say, like your yoga class. I'm just going to think about like, moving from this pose to this pose, and maybe chair pose is hard. And that's the patient for which you have, particular triggers, but moving through. And when you get behind or when you start toppling in your balance pose, that's not a problem. And that was able to shift her whole experience of the practice of medicine. So I think that gives you kind of an idea of how you can use directed mindfulness and ways that you want to feel, and tapping into some of these mindfulness tools that you have to change the way you practice medicine. And what I wanted to kind of shift to now is this thought of how can you use it to practice medicine? And the one other thought I have is charting with kindness. So many people that I work with are really behind on their charts and they have all this level of judgment. And I was actually coaching someone today and I'm thinking about Ni-Cheng's pressure on her shoulders. And when we talked about the charts and this pile of charts, it was a heaviness on her shoulders. And she talked about how it was so heavy when she tapped into her mindfulness, and there was so much pressure. And we talk about sort of the color. It was very dark and oozy. And we ended up actually getting to this place that it felt like a Dementor, for those of you who love Harry Potter. Like that's what it feels like when she comes to her charts. And so no wonder once you start noticing that she doesn't enjoy doing her charts, and they just become this thing, and they're just like the Dementors are just like taking over and like sucking the life out of you. So once you notice that, then you have the power to kind of shift it, because obviously you wouldn't choose to see your charting experience like a Dementor coming in. And she was a huge Harry Potter fan. It was really funny because afterwards I said, kind of sounds like a Dementor. And she said, that's exactly it. But when you can come up with those things, being curious and kind to yourself, so she's now not beating herself up over it. it's like, oh, this is what I see. And then you have this spaciousness to kind of change it. But when we started, it was just this like incredible shoulder heaviness. So it's interesting that you did the shoulders, and just realizing, she was like, it's just so heavy. And when I asked what color, she said, it's just so dark. And it would just like, so it's being able to see more clearly and then use interesting things and curiosity to make shifts to help you move forward in a much more easeful way. That's much, when you're thinking about profound change and making progress and shifts, if you're approaching it from this place of like creativity and not thinking about something as a dementor, is much more effective than like, I'm just going to force myself to sit down for half an hour every day and make it a habit and it's going to be fine. And, you know, that doesn't work as well. That's the willpower that they talk about. And yes, it works for a bit, but then you end up back where you started. And the other piece was that she had gotten caught up at one point and then had gotten behind again. And so she used that as evidence that she could never do it. Whereas the mindfulness helped her to see that, well, I was able to do it once, so it's possible I could do it again. Perhaps not with the dementors, but perhaps with a different imagery that I could bring to it, that I could do this again. And so that's sort of how you can integrate these things. And I'm hoping that actually Ni-Cheng or April could share, because I've not taken the mindful physician class, but I think that one of the things that's so powerful about mindfulness is being able to bring it into the exam room. And I loved doing that in pediatrics and sharing it with patients, but also for me, just taking deep breaths as I moved from room to room and focusing on being present. So I'd love to hear from either of you about what that's like and what you can learn.
And Miriam too, I'm going to call her out because she also
Wonderful.
was in my first class for mindful physicians. But it's, and to use the Harry Potter analogy here, it's like you have your own Patronus by incorporating mindfulness. Like mindfulness is the Patronus charm.
That's fantastic.
They both like laughing. But seriously, like if mindfulness can become your innate power, right? It comes from a place of love and light and non-judgment. And what if, and this is where like the mindful physician course, one of like the overarching goals when I was designing it was, what if your practice of medicine is an opportunity for practicing mindfulness, like in all aspects of you going into work. Those are all opportunities to practice mindfulness, really. So I wanted to let Miriam and April share their experience about mindful physicians and maybe even share some anecdotes of maybe how they've incorporated mindfulness into their practice of medicine.
Yeah, so I'm a general pediatrician, and I took Ni-Cheng's course last January, February. And I'm also doing a lot of trauma-informed care in my practice. And so because I'm working with kids and asking about trauma and with themselves as well as with their family, mindfulness is really helpful just to help bring up that parasympathetic response. And so often when I do the lung exam, I will have them take deep breaths and I will have them notice how they're feeling. We'll look at the different colors in the room. We talk about, like with food, you know, that if you think about red foods, those are great for your heart. If you think about green foods, those are great for your bones, and have them imagine, you know, which vegetables might be helpful for certain parts of their body and how does it feel when you eat those vegetables. And I found it to be incredibly powerful. And then we've also, because we're trying to do more trauma-informed care, also working with our staff, have been kind of incorporating more mindfulness with the staff and having them take breaths in the morning. We huddle in the morning and, you know, start by breathing, which is, I think, is super helpful because we're just often going and don't take that pause. So it's been fantastic for our office and myself and my patients and the parents, because it also helps the parents to, you know, have something to be able to do and to be able to just say, like, you can just breathe, go outside, notice all the colors. So helpful for everybody.
Thank you so much, Miriam.
I love that. I'm going to incorporate that. So I think I've incorporated it a couple ways in terms of the patients. As I mentioned, I'm a pulmonologist, and we've been seeing a lot of very anxious teenagers, young adults. So I kind of stole Ni-Cheng's pursed lip breathing, and I've been doing a lot of that with all of my asthma patients, and I see sleep medicine patients. So a lot of them are very anxious. So I've been kind of teaching them pursed lip breathing, which is kind of hard to show them behind a mask, but we do it. And then I've also been, again, from the Mindful Physicians course, I've stolen a few things. The hand on the doorknob, I think that was it Dr. Epstein? I can't remember who had initially started that, where when I put my hand on the doorknob, I take an intentional breath, and before I go in the room to kind of transition between patients. And then, unlike Jessie's client, I still get a little overwhelmed when it's busy. So I try to, if I start to get stressed that I'm behind or whatever, I try to incorporate that as well.
Thanks so much, April. And there's no stealing. This is like pursed lip breathing is taught in pulmonary rehabilitation. And Dr. Ron Epstein put that anecdote of like the doorknob meditation in his book, Attending. So there are universal tips to be had and shared for the better.
I don't know if I told you guys already, but I was doing a talk on trauma-informed care in clinic, and the speaker was Ken Epstein. He was talking, and then and then I was talking about doing one of the Just Like Me things where you kind of look at everybody and think just like me. And then he was like, "Hey, that's from my brother's book," and I'm like, "Your brother is Ron Epstein?" I was like, "Oh my God, I'm totally fangirling you right now." But yeah, lots of shared techniques.
So as we're nearing the end, I would love to invite questions that people have. If you have any questions, and we did want to end with a breathing practice to help anchor us as we move on back into our lives. But I would love to know if people have any questions, things they want to know about, and just offering the opportunity that it's possible to change, and it doesn't have to be hard. It's not easy, but it's also very much worth the engagement and the work. And I would say for me, it was so worth the effort, and is actually also fun. I think once you start to see that you can feel better and feel that spaciousness in your chest, it's like, I want more of that. And that becomes inspiring to keep at it and keep doing the work. So if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or throw them in the chat box. And otherwise, do you, since we're at 6:29, Ni-Cheng, do you want to do we'll just end with the breathing practice?
Yeah, so this is the mindful pursed lip breath practice that April was referring to, something that you can do with your family members, children, your patients, yourself, because it taps into your own physiology, our own physiology with our diaphragm and upregulating parasympathetic nervous system tone. So again, closing eyes or lowering your gaze a few inches in front of you, resting your attention on the breath at the nostrils. We'll take 3 breath cycles with this pursed lip breath. So inhaling through the nose like you're smelling roses, filling up, and then blowing out like you're blowing out birthday candles, 2 to 4 times longer. than your inhale. So one more time in through the nose, filling up and then blowing out birthday candles. And one last time in through the nose, filling up and exhaling through the mouth. Pausing, coming back to a normal breath at the nostrils. Just checking in to see how you feel now compared to 3 breaths ago.
And I would just offer at this point to once again bring your left hand to your heart and press in gently, and bring your right hand to top. And just notice if perhaps you have a little more of that tender self-acceptance. And when you're in this space of more calm and more spaciousness, do things feel more possible? Are you more curious? Can you treat yourself with more kindness? And look towards change, not as something to do, but something to enjoy and to explore, and as a journey. And then slowly lower your hands. And I want to give credit, the hand to heart. I also stole for using that technology, that verbiage, but it comes from Dr. Shauna Shapiro's book, Good Morning, I Love You, which is one of my favorite books on self-compassion. And I heard her speak about 2 years ago, and she brought that practice to my attention, and she talks about it in the book, and we did a book club discussing it, and I use it now in everything that I do, because I just notice if you just put your hand right there on your heart, it can change how everything feels. And so I offer, when you're feeling stuck or having a busy day or feeling behind or overwhelmed, that you can go to the breath, or you can go to hand to heart, because when you're coming from a mindful space of compassion and non-judgment, it's much easier to see the path forward and move forward with ease and slow speed. So I think we'll end there. We're happy to stay on and answer questions if people have them. And I encourage you to find some way of practicing mindfulness and bring more mindfulness into your life, because there's a cost to not, is what I'll say. Do you want to say anything else, Ni-Cheng?
Just thank you. Thanks everyone for being here and for sharing, especially April and Miriam, and for everyone in the chat box. Thanks for participating. And we hope that you will consider joining us for our next cycle of Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction and the Platinum package with coaching with Jessie, and then the CME course with me, Mindful Physicians. Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, and join us for the book club, Finding Om, on Saturday. It's a family book club, so you can bring your kids, and join me for yoga on Sunday, and Jill for tapping on Monday. Lots coming up this weekend. So don't forget those events, and the invites are in the group. And everyone is welcome to all of those. We'd love to see you there. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and feel free to unmute and